My name is Nick Molnar. I am a web developer who lives in Austin, Texas, and today we're going to talk about progressive web apps. Is everybody enjoying NDC so far, the first NDC in North America? All right, how was the keynote? All right, anybody coming to PubConf tomorrow night? Oh, okay. You definitely need to go to PubConf. Is Jacob in the room? No? The organizer of NDC isn't here? I come to NDC so I can go to PubConf, not the other way around. So spend the $30. It's basically buying yourself $30 of beer and be there. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Eric is turning me up. So we're going to talk about progressive web apps today. And I want to kind of put them into a little bit of context about historically from where we've been to where I think we're going. And I'm going to do that on two different scales. One is going to be richness, which is how rich the experience for the user is. And reach, how far, how many people can your application touch? How many people can use it? And so in the beginning days of software development, we had experiences that were pretty lacking, that only one person could use at a time. And so these are your common CLI tools or text-based tools, right? Really, and they're still used today. There's nothing wrong with them, but they're mostly used by folks like us who attend conferences like this. And then sometime in the early 90s, we got a little bit more sophisticated on the richness scale, and we introduced the concept of graphical user interfaces, right? And so metaphors like desktops and folders started to be used, and now all of a sudden it opened up computing and applications to less technical folks. They were a little bit more comfortable because they had a richer experience. Then in the later 90s, in some ways we took a step back in richness, but we increased our reach with the introduction of the internet, right? Like Web 1.0, and when literally it was just text. And then Mosaic came along and we added in images, and it got richer and richer. And over time, we got to the point where the richness of the web was rivaling that of what we had on desktop computers, but we also had the reach. And so this kind of time frame was when like Flash and Silverlight were kind of ruling the day. We could do fancy things like drag and drop and watch movies and play audio and even do like Skype type calls. This was actually a really great day for the web. And this is when I really was cutting my teeth in web development. But then in 2008-ish timeframe, everything changed because Steve Jobs stood on stage and introduced this device to the world. And basically created a more rich experience than any of us had seen before, where we had touch and gestures, and we even started to hint and think about speech recognition for our interfaces, and we had these natural UIs. But unfortunately, it was all done through proprietary APIs, which meant that if you wanted to ship an application that was that rich, you had to implement it multiple times. You did it for iOS, and you did it for Android, and then you did it for Windows, but none of you did it for Windows, and now Windows is gone. I don't blame you. And so, unfortunately, this is the state of the art today. We have these very rich experiences that if you want to get out to as many users as possible, you have to create 2 or 3 applications, or you have to use some kind of less common denominator framework that kind of lets you ship to both. So what we really want to do is figure out how can we get great richness and move it up into this area where we're getting global reach. And so my thinking and hope is that progressive web applications are going to be the thing that solves this problem. So that gives you a little bit of the context of where we're coming from. Now, you might be saying, oh, but Nick, haven't we already tried the web platform as an app thing before? Yes, we have, right? So Adobe had Air many years ago that was built on HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and Flash. Palm's last dying breath was to try to compete with Apple, was to come out with WebOS, which is based on web technologies. Apache Cordova has done the same thing for mobile. My own company, Microsoft, ships WinJS. Electron is a thing that's very popular today. In fact, there's multiple talks at this conference on Electron. The W3C even tried to do a standardization around this called widgets that never really went anywhere. But all of these app models effectively took the technology of the web, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but left behind the most important part of what makes the web, which is the web's deployment model. Because on the web, content is always fresh. If you want to update your experience, you ship it and your users get it basically immediately. You're not waiting around for them to go and hit update on their phone to pull down the new app. And I think that was the big oversight here from all of these companies. So I've been kind of dancing around talking about progressive web apps. The question is, well, what is a progressive web app? Well, the definition of a progressive web app features 9 attributes. The first is that a progressive web app has to be responsive, meaning that it's an application that works on multiple different devices with multiple different form factors and screen sizes. So the same app will work on this phone, that would work on that screen, that would work on my laptop. Next, it needs to be able to work offline or in a network, in an area where you have some network connectivity troubles. It should be app-like, because after all, we're trying to have that great richness that we already talked about, right? So users kind of expect apps to work well and in a certain way, and that needs to be true on the web as well. They should be fresh, because we already talked about that. The deployment model of the web is fresh. They should be safe, meaning we're talking to a trusted server, we're seeing trusted content. Doing safety on the web is a whole nother talk in and of itself, but for right now, we'll just assume, let's make sure that we're going over HTTPS. They should be discoverable, which is one of the great things about the web. We have search engines out there on the web that find content way better than the search engines and app stores. They should be re-engageable, which means that the app should be able to re-engage the user. This is most commonly done via push notifications. They should be installable. And I would actually argue that progressive web apps have a better installation experience than native apps on mobiles, because a native app is like, you open up the App Store, you do a search, you click through 3 of them to find the one that you wanted, you find the one that you want, you put your thumbprint on the thing 15 times before it registers, you watch the circle go around forever, it finally downloads, then you watch another circle go as it's downloading, and then you click on it and you open up, then you log in, and then you get to use the app. Let's have a better installable experience. And then lastly, they should be linkable, because links are the superpower of the web. The fact that I could be looking at some experience, copy a hyperlink, and send it to Bob, I told you, coming after you, Bob, and we're looking at the same experience, that is something that no other app platform has really ever been able to master. So there's 9 different attributes of progressive web apps. For the next hour, we're going to explore 3 of them, and they happen to be the 3 that align with the newest pieces of technology. So we're going to look at how to make apps work offline, how to make them installable, and how to make them re-engageable. So, I mean, effectively, a progressive web app is just a regular website. It's the website that you and your company already have that's taken all of its right vitamins. And really, a progressive web app is just an umbrella term in the same way that HTML5 was an umbrella term. It's not a technology. It's a set of technologies used together to achieve an effect. And this happens all the time in the web. The XML HTTP request object, or XML HTTP request API, was shipped in browsers for a long, long time. And it wasn't until Jesse James Garrett coined the term AJAX that we changed the way that we did interactivity on the web. Similarly, media queries were available in browsers for a while, and it wasn't until Ethan Marcotte took the usage of them and called it responsive web design that it changed the way that we do mobile web. And I think progressive web apps is the nice pithy name that we need to change the way that we do application development, particularly on mobile moving forward. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to make an app work offline. So let's go ahead and take a look at an app. So I don't drink, I mean, I have liquids, but I don't drink alcohol, and I don't drink hot beverages because hot is the temperature of the devil. So I just abstain. And it's challenging for me because I come to conferences a lot, and I hang out with speakers a lot, and they go to bars a lot. And I'm sitting there at the bar, and they're like getting their Pilsner and their IPA, and they're checking in all the beers that they had. And I'm like, oh, look, I have 2,500 beers that I drank. And I'm like, I'll have water. So what I decided to do is I was going to start tracking the sodas I drank, because I'm into craft soda. And I don't know if you guys know, you have a great bottler right down the street from here called Whistler. They make a caramelized pineapple soda that is fantastic. So I decided I was going to go ahead and build this simple little app that's available at sodapops.com. We're looking at the local version that I'm running right now. And so basically, I can go and I can see a bunch of different brands of bottlers that are available. Like we'll look at this one that's from Texas called Boots Beverages. They have a bunch of different flavors, like coconut cream soda sounds really good. Or what else? Lemon meringue. Ooh, that sounds good. Now this guy said I lost weight, and I don't know how. I'm drinking lemon meringue pie soda. And so I have the ability to pop it later, which means I want to open it up later. It's effectively adding it to my wish list of things I want to try. Or I can pop it now, and I can do a review and say how many stars I want, and I can enter in comments, and I can save that and see my reviews. If I also wanted to, I can just go look at different flavors. Like, let's go look at all the chocolate sodas that are available. And there's 4 or 5 of them, and I can go and I can track that down. So this is a fairly simple app. Now, I originally built this app, this is a true story, 2 years ago. In June of 2016, I went to the Homer Soda Festival. This is the largest soda festival in the United States. They poured about 1,000 different flavors of soda. Don't you all want to go to this thing with me next time? Oh, okay, fine. So this is in Homer, Illinois. Has anybody been to Homer, Illinois? I don't understand these people who are like, I've half been somewhere. I half live in Minnesota, or I half been to Homer. Well, I want you to notice something about Homer. It's basically one intersection and farm fields as far as the eye can see. So the night before the festival, I was going with some friends that I know from Chicago. I was putting in all the last-minute features into Soda Popped. This was going to be the unveiling, and we were going to start drinking sodas and ranking them. And I hop out of the car in Homer, and I jump on my app, and let me show you what happened. So I'm going to open up the dev tools. I'm going to come over here to the network tab, and they have something that they call offline mode. I call this Homer, Illinois mode. Because when I go to it and I turn it on, and I pulled out my phone and I loaded it up, this is the experience that I got. Homer has no Wi-Fi. It has no cell phone. And so for the next 3 hours, I drank soda and I ran my dinosaur over cactuses. So now we're going to see if I can get the high score. So that sucks. That is certainly not what I wanted to have happen. So there's lots of places besides Homer, Illinois, where we are connectively challenged, right? I flew up here. I was probably on the plane for 6 or so hours on the way up here, and you know, you often don't have Wi-Fi there. Or if you're in a large crowd. I'm a huge baseball fan, as we've already discussed. I've been to 29 of the 30 stadiums in the United States, and when you're at a ball game, you really don't get a great connection. Inside, I lived in New York City on the 34th floor. Sometimes it took 10 minutes to take the elevator up to my apartment. No connection. And the worst is when you're like staying at the hotel, like the Intercontinental where I'm at right now. They have this thing that I call Li-Fi. It's like you have Wi-Fi, but you don't. And so these are all the places and times we're connectively challenged. And so to be able to build a progressive web app means that not only do we work when we have zero connection, but also when we have a Li connection or a half connection. So the problem with Soda Popped is it was built like a standard web application. So let's look at the standard web application architecture. It assumes that you have a network connection on your client. The client makes a request out to the server does some processing, and it returns a response back. That's great. That's the model that we've always had. As web developers, we're very comfortable with that. But then you go into Homer mode, right? You have no connection. And as you start trying to make requests, they just kind of die a slow, painful death, and they never really make it off the device. So this is what was happening to me. Now, what a service worker does is it introduces a new concept. It's actually a separate piece of code. It's JavaScript that you write that runs in a separate process. And it's effectively a client-side proxy server. So what that means is even while I'm offline, I try to make a request. The service worker, the proxy, grabs the request, and it can do what it wants to, including synthesize or create its own response without going to the network and sending it back. Now, if I happen to be online, then the service worker can still grab the request. If it wants to, it can pass it along back to the server. The server does the original processing that it would have done, and we come back through the service worker into the client. So this is basically how we enable offline scenarios for web applications. So let's go ahead and add a service worker to Soda Popped. So to do that, we're going to start with this JavaScript file that I have here called site.js. Now, this file does a whole bunch of stuff that we don't care about, but you need to know that it's included on every single page in my app. I'm building an ASP.NET application, so I just included it in my layout file, and so it's everywhere. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and register a service worker. That's a very simple API. It looks like this. And so this first line here, I'm saying, if service worker is in Navigator, so if this browser that I'm running in supports service worker, then go ahead and register it. If it doesn't exist, we're just going to ignore service worker for this browser. This is the progressive part of progressive web apps, right? Like, we progressively get into an application-like experience if the browser supports it, and if not, that's fine, they get standard web. They need to upgrade their device or their browser to get more. So if it is available, then I just say I want to register a service worker, and I pass in a path to a JavaScript file. In this case, service worker min.js. 1 second, bud. And if there's any errors, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to catch those errors and send it to the console. Question? I'll show you that in a second. Yeah. So if you, I have a ton of content to cover today. So I'm going to try an experiment here. If you have a really burning question, shoot your hand up and I'll try to answer it, like this guy did a good job. If not, jot it down. I'm going to swing by the Microsoft booth as soon as I'm done, and I will stand there all day long and chat with you and answer questions, because I want to make sure that we get through the whole experience of the service worker. So once I've done that, I've now registered the service worker. So let me come back online, get out of Homer, and I'm going to go ahead and run my application, or refresh it. Okay, so my app is back up and running, but there's a subtle change. And now, it tells me that a service worker was installed at right now. This just happened. Now, that log statement you did not see in my code, because that's not coming from site.js, the file that we just changed. That's coming from the service worker file. So let me show you that. Uh-oh, I accidentally closed it. Cool. So the service worker looks like this. Effectively, we're going to call an API off of self. Self is referring to the service worker. It's kind of like using this. You would normally use this inside of the browser. Instead of as a service worker, you would call self. And so we're adding an event. So when the thing gets installed, we have a chance to do something. And right now, I'm doing something very simple. I'm just logging out service worker installed. So this is where that log message came from. Very simple. This is like the hello world of service workers. We're still not offline. Let's go ahead and build this thing up. So the next part that we're going to do is when we are installing our service worker, which happens automatically, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cache a bunch of assets, the static files that I need to build the UI for my website. So to do that, the install event, I have this parameter that's passed in called event. And it has a method on it called wait until. Now, I'm about to do a bunch of work. And so wait until is my way of telling the browser, hey, browser, wait until all of this work is done. And wait until takes a promise. So as soon as the promise resolves, it knows that the service worker is installed if the promise succeeds. And if it fails, then it knows the service worker didn't install. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use this new API that's part of the service worker spec called caches. And so I'm basically going to open up a cache that I've arbitrarily named static, because that's where I'm sticking my static content. Now, if a cache doesn't exist with the name static, that's fine. It'll just create one. So this is get or create, right? Whichever one. But I'm going to get one back. And then after I get it back, I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, I want to add all of these URLs to my cache. And so you'll see things in here like PNGs, HTML, font files, CSS, JavaScript. Now, I also want to call out here that you'll see this double curly brace syntax. This has nothing to do with service workers. This is my build system. I'm actually like concatenating files and adding fingerprints to the file names and things like that. So my build system will fill in the real URL here. But basically, it's these files, right? I'm getting star PNG and plus PNG and IPNG. They just happen to get optimized and whatnot. So once I do that, I can save my service worker. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to this application tab. Now, this is a tab that you maybe haven't seen in the Chrome DevTools before. Let me try to zoom in a little bit here. And it is showing me that I have a service worker installed. This is the one that we just installed a minute ago at 157. And it's given it an ID of 451. Now, I just made a change to my service worker, right? We're now caching some stuff. And by default, service workers only get updated every 24 hours, which makes development really, really painful. So in tools, we're just going to say update on reload. And now it's going to get updated every time we change it. This is what you should do when you're doing development. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to refresh. We're now at number 452, has been installed. And if I go and I look at my cache storage, we'll see here's the cache called static. And here's all of those files that I decided to stick in here. So here's my JavaScript file, and here's a PNG. It's a sprite that I have. So these are those files getting cached. So great. At this point, I have a service worker installed, and I've downloaded and saved a bunch of stuff in the cache. Now, this is not the HTTP cache that you would control with cache control headers. This is an additional cache. You get both of them. The beauty of this cache is you can access it programmatically with JavaScript. So let me show you how we're going to do that. I'm going to go back to my service worker, and there's another event available called fetch. Now, the fetch event is fired anytime the browser is about to make a request for something. This is the proxy part of service worker. So basically what I'm saying is anytime the browser wants to go and fetch a resource from the network, I'm going to get involved and I'm going to say, whoa, 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 whoa. Instead of doing what you normally do, I'm going to respond to the request with this. I'm going to respond with, and then I can do whatever I want. So I could generate a string and I can return it. I could use a templating language like handlebars or something and generate some content and return it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the caches API, and I'm going to look across all of my caches. I only have one right now named static. I'm going to look across all of my caches to see if there is something in the cache that matches the request that the browser is trying to make right now. So that event.request that I have highlighted, that's the request that it's trying to make. I'm saying go look in the cache to see if I've already cached that request before. If I have, then I get this response back. Great, I just read something from the cache, return it. Never hit the network. Great performance optimization. If it did not come from the cache, because I didn't cache every file on my entire website, if it did not come from the cache, then this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and look to see if the user is offline, if they're in Homer, basically, right? So line 37 here says, if not navigator.online. .online is probably the worst name API in all of JavaScript because it doesn't actually tell you if the user is online because they don't really know because of situations like live-fi. It should be called maybe online, but they didn't name it that. Really, it should be called offline, which is effectively what I'm doing by saying not online. I'm saying if I know they're not offline, which is a predictable state, then I want to go ahead and I want to pull out of my cache a different file, not the file that they requested. I want to get my offline experience, this offline HTML file, and we're going to return that. But if they are online, or I think they might be online, then let's go ahead to the server and fetch, and we'll rely on the network there. So with this in place, now when I'm on my application, let me go ahead and make sure we have the newest version of the service worker. So 452, we're at 453 now, great. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go offline. Let's do a browse. I'm going to go to brands. And now I still have this kind of lame offline experience because I'm just trying to pique your imagination here. But this is branded offline experience. The little dinosaur game is scared because the dinosaur knows he's about to be extinct because that offline page is never going to be seen anymore with service workers. So you can do anything that you wanted to in this response, with this response. Typically, I might actually return the list of soda brands, and I have them all grayed out, and none of them are links that you can click. So you can still see what's in the catalog, but you can't get further details. You can use your imagination can go wild here to figure out what you want to do. So that's the new offline experience, and that is how we create an offline app. So the next technology is to make applications that are installable. This is the easiest piece of technology of the three that we're going to cover today. This is built on the top of something called the Web App Manifest. And so in each of your pages, once again, I'm using ASP.NET, so I'll probably stick this in my layout file. I'm going to add a link tag with, in my head with a rel of manifest and point to a JSON file. Now, my JSON file, let me just show you what it looks like, is literally just a simple collection of properties and values. But let me walk you through what each one of these properties and values does. So here's a copy of that file. So effectively, each one of these properties is telling the device that's going to run the progressive web app how to treat this application. It's some metadata about the application as a whole. So first of all, there's a name and a short name. And so those are the things that would show up when somebody tries to add the app to the home screen. It's the default name. It's Soda Popped because I have Soda Popped. Or if you're using the app install banner. And I'm going to show you both of these experiences in a moment. Short name is if you have a really long name. Like, I don't know if you use the Bank of America app on your mobile phone, but Bank of America is kind of a long name. So their short name is BOA. And so under your icon, it says BOA. And that's the short name for limited space. You get to have a start URL, which is like, hey, when somebody starts up my application, what is the thing that we should show them? I use the home page of my app. Maybe you have a special entry point you want to use in your progressive web app. You have a background color and a theme color. The background color is used to generate an automatic splash screen. We'll see that in a moment. And then the theme color is what the operating system draws as the Chrome for your application. And I don't mean Chrome as in Google Chrome, the browser. I mean Chrome as in the operating system stuff, the shell that goes around your app. In this case, my theme color of 34495E is the same color as my background color of my website. So it's kind of hard to see. So I'm going to change my theme color here to red. So you can see I'm actually changing the title bar color, and I can affect that in the operating system. I can do other things like set the orientation if I want it to be portrait or landscape. There's a display property which says like how much of the screen do you really want to own. So you can go full screen, which is still going to leave a bare minimum of browser UI, or you can say that you're a standalone application and you completely take over the screen. There's no browser UI available, but that means you're going to lose things like a back button or a refresh button, and so you have to think about how do you add those things into your application. And then finally, you can pass in an array of icons. Those icons are used all over the place, like an icon that goes to the home screen or the things that show up in the install experience. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. I think the best way to look at this is in Android or a device of choice. And I can't hook this up to my Windows machine. So I'm going to use this Android emulator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open up Chrome. And I want to browse to my website, which is at localhost 55194. So localhost 55194, go. And it says the site can't be reached. Now, this is a common problem that I see people who are working on progressive web apps run into. The problem is port 55194 means nothing inside of this Android VM. 55194 is on the host operating system, my Windows machine. So somehow I need a way to get out of Android and onto the little web server that's running on my machine. Well, Chrome makes that really easy to do with this little known feature over at Chrome whack inspect. And so when you go there, you can turn on this option called port forwarding. So I'm going to say I'm going to enable port forwarding, and we're going to forward port 8080 to localhost, and then the actual port 55194. Done. Now I get this kind of yellow warning that port forwarding is active, and if I close this tab, I will break that connection. But as long as the tab is open, it could be in the background, I'm going to be able to do port forwarding. So what that means is now I can come back to my emulator, and instead of going to 55194, I have 8080 being routed over there. I can go to 8080, and now I'm actually serving my local app. I can go into Visual Studio and set a breakpoint if I want to now, and navigate in Android, and I'll hit that breakpoint. So this is really handy. Now, when we're dealing with the web app manifest, it's all about installation. And there's two ways to install your application in mobile browsers. And I kind of think of it as a pull model where the user says, I want this thing. And then there's a push model where you tell the developer, hey, do you want this? So in the pull model, usually there's dots here. I think Chrome wants me to, oh, good. No. OK. So I'll go to add to home screen, and this pops up, and I can hit add. And now the app is installed. But your user has to know that that's a thing that they can do, and that's not typically how native apps are installed. Like if I go to CNN.com, a little banner pops up in whatever browser I'm using and says, hey, do you want to install the native app that goes with this website? And I hit yes. This is not that experience. This is the pull experience. What we want to look at is the push experience. So unfortunately, the browser vendors do not allow you to push that banner on your users. The browser itself decides, it looks like your user likes your application. They've been here multiple times, and you seem to have a pretty good application, so we'll do the prompt and ask them if they would like to install. That's kind of frustrating. There's a way that you can test it, though, with the dev tools. So what I'm going to do is on this Chrome inspect, not only can I use Chrome DevTools to look at the tabs that I'm running on my machine, but I can also hit this inspect link, and I can inspect Chrome running inside of the Android emulator. And I'll prove it. I'll come over here and look at my output, and you can see that I'm now interacting with elements on the page inside of Android. So I'm going to come back over to application, and I'm going to click on this manifest tab. I don't really think that this is a very useful tool. It basically tells you the values that you had in your manifest, like it shows me my colors and my start URL. Not that interesting, but what is interesting is I can force to see what it would look like when the install banner appears. So I hit add to home screen, and boom, that's what pops up. And then if a user saw that, they're going to go and click, oh yeah, I like this, let me add it to my home screen. And I hit add, and it says Soda Pop was added to your home screen. And so if I go and I look at my home screen, there it is. There's Soda Pop installed with my icon, my name, the whole nine. So let me go ahead, and you can see I still have Chrome running. Here's Chrome. Let me clear that out. Let me open up the application now. There's my splash screen with that teal color I told you about. Here's the start page that I chose. I told you I chose my home page. And if I go into the task switcher, this thing doesn't say Chrome on it at all. This is Soda Pop. This is an application. It's a first-class experience. So that is what adding to the home screen does. Now, I told you that the browser will decide for you when that banner gets pushed on the users. And it does that through a set of heuristics. So first of all, your site has to be secure with a green lock icon, which means that not only is your page served over HTTPS, but all of the assets that your page requires are served over HTTPS. So you might need to work with any like ad vendors or third-party scripts that you have to make sure that's happening. You have to have a service worker registered, which you all know how to do. You have to have an offline experience available, which you all know how to do. And then you have to have an app manifest with some of the properties that we already covered, like name and short name. You have to have an icon that's at least 144 pixels by 144 pixels. You have to have a start URL, and the display either has to be standalone or full screen. So all the things that we just looked at, you kind of have to just do them. Now, the challenge with these heuristics is they change over time. And the browser vendors have slightly different implementations. So they kind of keep on raising the bar on you because they want progressive web apps to be good web apps, not just like take your crappy website, sling a couple of lines of JavaScript on it, and then say, boom, you have an application, because they want people to have high expectations of progressive web apps. So the best way to figure out if your app would get an install banner to show up automatically is to use a tool called Lighthouse. So I'm going to come back to my app. We're going to get back online here real quick. Lighthouse is built into the Chrome DevTools in a tab called Audits. See, here's Lighthouse. And I'm going to go ahead and perform an audit. There's a bunch of different tests that you can run to save some time. I'm only going to run the progressive web app tests. I hit Run Audit. Now, this is going to make my screen dance. It's going to do a whole bunch of poking and prodding at my website. And you can see there's a progress bar. While this is running, let me give you a little bit of information about Lighthouse. So first of all, it's built by Google. Now, they're kind of the torchbearers right now when it comes to progressive web apps. So they're mostly studying the heuristics. Other vendors may follow them to a T, they may not, but it's a good thing to check. It's open source. There's a Chrome extension, this is what I'm showing you now, but there's also an NPM module. So if you want to do this like kind of on check-in or on a CI server, you can run the same test against your app there, and you can make sure that they're hitting the bar. So let's see if we're done running. Great, we are. I got a score of 82. That's actually a pretty good score. But you might be able to see here that user will not be prompted to install the web app. I have a couple of things I need to fix. So I did not successfully serve the manifest start URL. So I need to go ahead and, I'm not caching my start URL. I should add that into the cache, and that would fix that problem. You can see that there's 9 other things that I completed properly. So I have a registered service worker. I respond to 200 when I'm offline. I'm using HTTPS. My page is loading fast enough on 3G, et cetera, et cetera. And they also give you some other things that they don't actually check, but you might want to go off and check manually, like make sure this thing works cross-browser and that each page has a unique URL. So if you do these things, it will tell you, hey, Chrome is going to give that app install banner. All right, so now the big one. How do we make content and applications that are re-engageable? This comes down to web push, and how do we make notifications appear? So there's really 3 steps to web push. I'm going to cover all 3 together graphically, and then we're going to go through each one step by step in code, and we're going to implement this. So the way web push works is every browser vendor, so Microsoft, Google, Mozilla, Apple, they have a web push server that they run. So every browser has its own web push server. When we say we want to enable web push with a user. We ask that user's device via JavaScript to give us a subscription. That device goes to the push server, gets the information from Google or whatever the vendor is. It returns that information to the device, and then we send that data back to ourselves and we store it. Right? So I say, hey, Bob wants to subscribe to notifications from me. So I run some JavaScript on Bob's device. Bob's device calls out to Google because he's using Chrome. Google says, okay, that's fine. Here's a subscription. I'll show you what a subscription is in a second. And then I use JavaScript to send Bob's subscription back to me, and I store it in a database. So now I'm holding some information about Bob, and that's what I need to send him a push notification. Once I have that information, the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to send a message. Part of what's in that information is encryption keys. So whatever message I want to send to Bob, I can't send directly to Bob. I send to Bob through Google. And I don't want Google to see the very important things that I'm sending to Bob. So I use the encryption keys that I got. I encrypt the message. I send it over to Google. Google forwards it along to Bob. And now Bob has some new data that just appeared on his phone. You would think we'd be done, but we're not. Because at that point, all that happens is a JavaScript event is fired on Bob's device that I need to respond to. And so when I respond to that, I will raise a notification, make a little toast up here. And at some point, Bob is going to go and click on that notification, and I want to do something with that event. So those are the 3 phases of work that we need to do to enable web push. We need to configure the push, send the message, and receive the message. So now we're going to go through them each individually. So configure the push. I ask Bob's device for a subscription. He goes and asks his vendor for the subscription. It comes back from his vendor, and then he sends it back to me, and I store it in my database. So let's just do that part. Let me show you what the experience for push notifications looks like on SodaPopped. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to log into my app. I log in with Facebook here. Now we're looking at my profile page. Here's some of the reviews that I had for some caramel soda and L81 and some different root beers and stuff. And I have one on my wish list. I want to try this almond cola from Fest Cola. But I also have this ability to sign on to push notifications. And so all I have to do is, this is a toggle button. I push the button, and now I'm subscribed. And if I wanted to turn it off, you can see I can just say turn off notifications, and I do that, and I've turned off notifications. So that's how it works. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. Actually, you know what? Let's go and look at how this button works. So here's profile.js. This is a JavaScript file that only gets served on profile pages. This is the code that makes that button work. And it's a toggle button. So we're going to look at not only how to subscribe, but also how to unsubscribe, because I think that's equally important. You want your users to be able to get out of it. So when the notification button is clicked, the first thing that I do is disable it. From there, I start using some new APIs. So there's a thing called a push manager available, and I say, hey, give me the subscription. And if there already is a subscription that exists for this website, for that browser, it just hands it back to me. So if what I get back is not null, that means Bob already has a subscription, in which case he's trying to unsubscribe. So to do that, I just take the subscription object, which is S, and I say unsubscribe. That goes off and tells Google, Bob doesn't want to get notifications anymore from SodaPopped. And now, no matter how many times I send things to Google to tell Bob from SodaPopped, they won't allow it because Bob has told Google, I'm not interested anymore. But my backend is still storing that subscription. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call my API, my subscription API, and I'm going to say, hey, delete Bob. Bob doesn't care about subscriptions anymore. So now I know Bob doesn't care. Google knows Bob doesn't care. Everybody knows. And then I handle some errors, and I change the state of the button. I change the icon so the bell has the line through it or not. Okay, so that's unsubscribe. The subscribe is just slightly more complex. If I don't already have a subscription, then I tell the push manager to subscribe. Now there's 2 properties that I have to pass into that subscribe call. The first is a little bit of a weird one, this user visible only. You have to have it, and it has to be set to true. If you set it to false, it won't work. There's some weirdness in the spec right now that they're working through, but effectively this is you as a developer acknowledging I'm only going to be using push notifications to show notifications. I'm not just going to be sending Bob a bunch of data and not actually showing him that something happened. And this is my way of acknowledging that. I think they're going to fix this in the future. The next thing we need to do is we need to set this application server key. And the hard part about it is it has to be URL base64 to uint8 array encoded. I'm like, what the heck does that mean? So I did what all good developers do. I went to GitHub and I copied the implementation. This is a true story. My spidey senses tell me that this will just become part of the API surface area and it will just be shipped in the browsers and you can just call it to do it. But everybody right now just copies this, even the spec references it. So it does a bunch of math that doesn't really matter. The important thing here is, though, I start with this public key. It's called a vapid key. Vapid is the name of the spec around how the keys are managed. And so I have to create a key. Now, the easiest way to create one of these keys is to head over to this push companion. And all of the URLs that I'm showing are going to be available to you in one package. And so I can come over here and just say, oh, give me some keys. And it will just generate them. And I keep on going until I find one that I like BLO, no, that's not good. Oh, BB7, that's good. That's the ones that I want. So I'm going to take my public key and my private key, and I'm going to store them, and I'm going to start using them. So my build system takes my public key out of my configuration file and injects it in here. Once again, we see that double curly brace syntax. I only want to put my public key in my JavaScript file. My private key is private and should never be shipped to the client. Okay, so we do that. We get one of those keys. We manipulate it with the URL base64 to uint8 array. And we ask for a subscription. When that's done, I do some simple logging so we can see what one of these subscriptions looks like in a second. And then I tell my server that I want to store this subscription. So we're basically doing the opposite. Bob's saying, I want in. He tells Google, I want in. And then I tell my backend, we want in. And this is where I actually store the thing, to store the subscription. And then I update the button icon. So let's take a look at that log. We go to the console, clear this out. I'm going to subscribe. And I have this JSON. This is what a subscription looks like. It's basically three properties. There's an endpoint, which is a URL. This is the URL at Google that I call when I want to send something to Bob. There's also a set of keys. There's two of them. There's a key called P256DH, and I'm sure that means something to a cryptographer, but for a dum-dum like me, I'm like, okay, whatever. And there's also one called auth, and I can guess what that one means. So these are the three pieces of data that I need to store and that I've stuck into my database to make all of this work. And now I can't get out of zoom in mode. And I'm closing tabs left and right. Come on, zoom it. Let's see. Sorry for the brief technical interruption. Okay, so at that point, I've configured push. I know this is a little technical, stick with me. So now we're gonna do the second part, remember, which is sending message. So I'm going to take the message that I want to send, I'm going to send it over to Google, and Google is going to send it down to Bob. Let's look at how we do that. So I'm going to switch over to my admin controller. This is on the back end. This is how I manipulate the Soda Popped catalog. All of the beverages that are available in there, I do through this admin interface. And anytime I edit one of the sodas or I add a new soda, this notify users method is called. Basically like, hey, there's a new soda available. Let's tell all of the users who have asked for subscriptions, who have asked for notifications to know what's going on. So actually sending a push notification would be very, very difficult to do because of all the encryption involved. However, this is where open source saves the day. If you come over to this web push libs organization on GitHub, there's implementations of web push for every different backend language that you could think of. PHP, Python, Node, Java. I'm using this web push C# library. Now, in that library, I can actually just use this static method called vapid helper.generate vapid keys, and that's how I can get a public-private key from this thing. But it doesn't matter. I literally just use the website I showed you earlier. A key is a key. They all meet the spec. But I have to tell my NuGet library that I'm using about my vapid keys. So first thing I have to do is I have to pass in what's called a subject. This is basically, you're supposed to send in your email address. And this is if like Google is pissed at the notifications that I'm sending through, they have a way to contact me and be like, stop. But it's just a string, so I don't know how they really enforce that. And then I pass in my public and private key, which we already saw how I got. Okay, so a couple more bits of work that I need to do here. First, I want to find out about all of the subscriptions I have, all of the people who want to receive a push notification. So I go to my database, this is my own database query, and I say, give me all of them. So I'm going to get Bob, and I'm going to get Steve, and I'm going to get Y, and I'm going to get Kyle. I'm going to get all of those people. Then I'm going to go ahead and go to my database and say, give me the information about the drink that was just added. And so that's what this data thing is. And then I take data, and I turn it into a payload. I make some JSON out of it. And so I'm going to have a drink and a brand. It's just some information about the drink that I want to use in my notification. That's payload. So that's kind of all the setup work that I need to do. From there, I use that NuGet library to new up a web push client, and I loop over all of my subscriptions that came from my database, and I have to project them from my data format to this library's format. But you can see here, there's an endpoint, which we saw in the JSON. Here's that P256DH thing that I don't know about, right? And here's the auth key. I just pass these three values. Literally, I'm just doing left-hand, right-hand programming here, where I'm just putting it into the data model that they want. Then, all I simply say is, hey, web push client, send a notification to this subscription, so to this person, to Bob, or to Kyle, or to Y, with this payload, with the data that I created up here when I made this bit of JSON. This is the data about my drink. With my vapid details, with my public and private key. It handles the encryption for me. It handles actually doing the HTTP post to send the data to whatever browser vendor is being used. And if there's an error, I get a web push exception. So that completes the send message phase. The third and final phase is to receive the message. So I told you there's going to be a JavaScript event that gets fired on the client. I need to respond. I need to capture that event and actually raise the toast notification. And then when Bob goes and clicks on the notification, I want to do something with that. And so let's go ahead and look at how we do that. That's actually just two simple events that we need to go and implement. So I'm going to go back to my service worker. The first event is called push. This means, hey, data just came in over the wire. What do you want to do with it? So I subscribe to an event called push. That event has a .data property that I read as JSON, and now I have my payload. This is the information about the new drink, or the edited drink, right? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show a notification. That notification has a title, right? It's like a subject, which is just hard-coded to say new soda on soda popped. And it has a set of options, a set of things that I want to configure the notification to have and be and do. Now, these options, there's a bunch of different options available. Like I can set the body of a notification. I can say whether or not it has an icon or an image. I can put buttons on my notification, which are what they call actions here. So my buttons have an ID of view and later, and it has a title and an icon that goes with it. There's a whole bunch of different options. To play with the options, the best thing to do is to come over to this notification generator, which one of the spec writers has created. And basically, you can see all of the different options that you can create, and then you can say display a notification, and it will fire a notification for you in your browser to do that thing. So, whoops. So in this case, this is like the default notification that this tool gives you. Let's go ahead and change the title to something custom, like Hello NDC Minnesota. And let's add an image in of a cat photo is available. We'll use that. And let's go ahead and add actions. So I want 2 actions. And we'll just say that if somebody clicks on one of the actions to display an alert. And I go ahead and I hit display the notification. And with those options, this is what my notification looks like, right? There's that cat picture. You can see hello, NDC Minnesota. That was the title I put. Here's my 2 buttons. It just called them yes and no. If I click on one, it does an alert. So this is kind of really a fun way to see what you can do with notifications. My favorite is vibration. Now, my device doesn't support vibration, but on a real Android phone, you can come in here and say, oh, I want to do smooth criminal vibrations. And I tried this on a friend's phone, and I hit it, and it's like, din, 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 din. I was like, that's Ice Ice Baby. I was like, that's cool. So this is just a quick way to play around with these options. But back to real world, here's how I'm setting my options programmatically, the same thing that's doing in the background. So those options go into show notification, and the toast appears. Now, when the user clicks on the notification, this notification click event is fired. Now, the event that comes in with that has a .action property. This property is telling us what is the actual part of the notification that they clicked. Did they click on one of the buttons? Did they click on some other part that's not a button? So, for example, I have a case called later. This is one of the buttons. That's because I have an action here called later. This is they clicked on the pop it later button. And so if they do that, in that case, I'm going to go ahead and grab a bunch of the data out of the notification, and I'm going to post it up to my API, and I'm going to say, hey, this person wants to drink this thing later. And they've effectively added it to their wish list without ever visiting my website. They just saw the notification like, oh, that sounds good. I'm going to have that later. Or if they click on the view button, right, this see it button, it will just open up the app and take them to the new soda. And actually, if they click anywhere else on the notification, the default case, I do the exact same thing. So my view and my default are the same. And so I open up a window, basically, so they can see that. So let's go ahead and see if we can make all of these things work together. What do you say? The whispers are amazing. So I'm going to go ahead and go to application. Let's make sure we have the newest service worker here. Okay, let's turn on push notifications. So there's my push notification. So what I'm going to do is let's open up my admin interface. Set a super secret URL. Let's put that over here. And let's open up my web app over here. So I'm set up. So right now, let's see, I really want to have this almond cola from Fest Cola. So let's do something different. I'm going to go to Boots Beverages, coconut cream soda. So I could add a soda. Actually, it takes longer. So I'm just going to edit a soda. If I edit a soda, it will notify me that there's a new soda. So we'll pretend that coconut cream soda is new. So if all the stars align, when I hit submit on this admin interface, everybody who's subscribed, which is just me right now, will receive a notification. So I'm going to hit submit. My notification appears. Let's go ahead and try this one later. I hit pop it later. The notification goes away. And now if I reopen the app, which in this case I'm just going to hit refresh, there we go. I now want to try that coconut cream soda later. And the crowd goes wild. Y'all are awesome. So, we started today talking about richness versus reach. And I hope with what you saw today, how we build offline capable, installable, re-engageable applications, that you can see that really I think the future is going to be progressive web apps where we're going to continue to get richer and richer. And I just showed you like kind of the big 3 or 4 use cases of what we're doing in native apps. But we also do things in native apps like tap to pay. There's a spec actually already supported in many browsers for that. So you could do that same experience in the web. Authenticate with a fingerprint. That also is coming right now into a bunch of browsers. And so browsers are just going hog wild right now on specifications to give you all of the same features and capabilities. You can already do geolocation, and you can already interact with the telephone. You can already send text messages. There's a bunch of things you can already do to make a web app, a progressive web app, look and feel like a native application. If you enjoyed this, thought it was a little too quick or too fast, that's a little bit by design. I apologize. But feel free to follow up with me. Like I said, I'll be at the Microsoft booth to answer questions. Or check out one of my 3 Pluralsight courses that I have specifically on this. It's 9 hours of content. I have one course. It's almost 3 hours just on service workers and all of the edge cases and cool things you can do with that. I have another one that effectively covers everything else that we talked about, like push notifications, installable applications. And my newest one, which came out a few weeks ago, is almost 2 hours on how to make web apps more app-like using something called the app shell model. It's a way to kind of turn applications into separating the content from the shell so you can have a really fast experience that users kind of expect. If you don't want to talk to me at the Microsoft booth and you want to follow up, I tweet at nickmd23. You can find out more on my website at nickcodes.com. Once again, I mentioned the Pluralsight videos. Don't forget to do evals. My favorite color is green. You can take a picture of this QR code or go to nickcodes.com/pwa-fundamentals. And all of the links and everything that I showed there today is available for you to go and grab. I will have time to take questions from anybody who wants it, but you guys were great, and I was awesome. Thank you so much. I know there was one question, 2 questions, Matt?
Notifications you showed in the browser, how will that work on your Android device?
It works exactly how you would expect notifications to work on Android. It'll come down from the top. Yeah, I just didn't do it in the emulator, but it will work in an emulator, and you can do it.
Okay, so you still have the same control that you did over the template button?
Yep. Yeah, so some browsers support more or less buttons. I think 2 is kind of the safe number right now. You could add as many as you want to in your options, and the browser will just take the first 2 if it only supports 2, or it'll take the first 3 if it supports 3. So you really have to think about progressive enhancement on your buttons and say, these are the actions I want them to have the most first. And if they don't support any of them, what's going to happen when you click on that, the default case, which for me was opening up to the new soda. Can you interact with the badge and the dot on the icon? Oh, so like up in the title bar, that little dot that shows up? Oh, I know what you're saying. So like on, so like on my email app, I get a little thing that says I have 4 unread emails. As far as I'm aware, there's no spec that allows you to do that at the moment. So does everybody follow? He's asking like, how do I get like you have 3 unread things, you have 4 notifications. I'm not aware of anything that does that. I think Edge on Windows supports that. Don't quote me on that. But I don't think Android or Safari do at the moment. Oh, you actually also asked about, and I totally skipped this, what does support look like? Let me quickly show you that. So we covered 3 main technologies. The first was service workers. So service workers are basically available now in all browsers. Edge since 17, Firefox, Chrome, Safari for iOS was the last holdout. It is there now in the newest version. So that's great. The Web App Manifest is basically available everywhere but Firefox. I'm not really sure why Firefox hasn't got with the program yet. But that's something that, that's really, this is why this is progressive enhancement, right? Like it's okay that they don't support it. That doesn't mean throw out the baby with the bathwater. Everybody else will have a great experience, and it's only adding in a couple lines of code in a JSON file. And then the push API is available everywhere but Safari, because Apple, like they do, have their own proprietary API for doing the same thing. So if you definitely want to support everybody, you do both. I do think Safari has pledged support for it, but it hasn't been there. They just got service workers to land, and that's a prereq for push notifications. So they're just running a little bit behind. Yes? Yes, so let me open up my Android emulator. So when I open up my app now, it is full screen. And so you want to set that display. I talked about it being full screen, which will show the URL bar, or standalone, which means I'm a standalone application. I'm a big boy. I'll handle the back button. I'll handle the refresh. I'll handle all of that navigation myself. So standalone is what you're looking for there. And you have to have one of the 2 to get the banner to automatically ask the user if they want to install. We're here in the front. I could have. Well, let's try this. Yeah, so the question is, can I force something to happen on the screen? The answer is yes. So let me go to, let's see, Caramel Apple. I'm on the admin interface here on the left. Let me submit that. That's going to create a new notification. I clicked Pop It Later before. If I hit See It, it's a little awkward on the desktop because I'm using 2 browsers. It automatically took me to that page, Caramel Apple. So if I was on my device, or this is because I'm being the admin user and the regular user, it would just change the browser to that thing. So it's forcing me to go there. I could make Pop It Later do the same thing and go to my profile page, which would force the refresh. So you would see it pop up. In the back? So the question is there any other way to install the application other than the browser? That is a rapidly changing landscape. So the Windows team, the Edge team, is adding PWAs into their app store. So you can go into the Windows store, and you can see PWA apps through that. I believe Chrome has officially announced that they are looking to add the same support. No word from Apple. So it depends on what app store you're targeting. I mean, obviously, you're going to want all of them. There's a really good article that somebody did about how they got their PWA into all of the app stores and what hoops they had to jump through. If you ping me on Twitter, I'll find the URL. It came out like 2 weeks ago. Everybody internally, I'm not on the Edge team, but I'm on some of their mailing lists. They were raving about how good this article was and how we need to simplify that story. Right in the center?
Kind of the same question. Are there any well-known?
There is. Let me see if it's still around. I think it was pwa.rocks was the last one that I saw. Yeah, so pwa.rocks this is done by like one of the evangelists, I think at Opera, and here's a bunch of just different progressive web apps. The biggest ones right now that are getting kind of all of the press are Twitter Lite, the Twitter Lite client, and I think they're the other one that is a big deal is already in this list. Yeah, this Flipkart, this is one of the largest, this is like the Amazon of India. And they don't have a mobile experience anymore. They do it all as a progressive web app because they find that they get better phone support, we get better battery life, and with networks being what they are in the rural areas of India, they actually get much better engagement from their customers. I think the New York Times is a progressive web app now, the Financial Times, there's a whole bunch of them. This list is actually out of date. It doesn't look like they've updated it in a while. But yeah, this is the best place to see a repo. Awesome. Well, I am out of time. I want to be respectful to the next speaker. I'll be at the Microsoft booth if you want to chat more. Thank you all so much. I appreciate you coming out.